Hey friend, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here listening to another episode of the Pattern Design Circle podcast. Here we talk all about the ins and outs of designing knit and crochet patterns and running a business that makes it all possible. I'm Jessica, your host, knitting pattern designer, design mentor, and the friend in your ear. Can't wait to dive right in. The Pattern Design Circle podcast is sponsored by the Pattern Design Circle, a membership community for knit and crochet pattern designers that are feeling lost, lonely, or frustrated in their business. It connects you with a supportive community that's always eager to answer your questions and help you through the hard times. And there's loads of resources and activities specifically catered to business and designing. Sound like your jam? Check it out at snickerdoodleknits.com/design-circle. That's snickerdoodle, like the cookie, knits, knits.com/design-circle. All right, let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pattern Design Circle podcast. I'm so excited to be back here in your ear chatting with you, and I have a special guest with me. I have Renee Van Hoy, and we are going to talk all about accessibility. So we'll talk about accessibility in patterns, but we also want to talk about accessibility in other parts of your business as well, because for people who are impacted, need more accessible options, it literally impacts everything. And perhaps maybe I could say especially online. But we'll dive into all of that. First of all, Renee, would you like to give us a short little introduction to yourself?
Well, I'm Renee Van Hoy. I've been a pattern designer for about 15 years. I've designed for loom knitting, which is actually a large population that most of them are using looms as an accessible device. They're unable to hold needles or crochet hooks, and they find the loom very accessible and enjoyable. And so I've done that. I wrote the first two loom knitting stitch dictionaries, and I've done a few charity compilations, so I've edited for those. And then in recent years, I've also taught online. I think everybody did. I did 12 master classes for loom knitting that were all accessible classes. I had a large blind population taking that. And I've been editing for a number of magazines, making stories and in tandem. And Murat magazine, we're just about to do our 6th issue, and we create visually accessible versions in digital format of that, as well as working with websites and some developers, software developers. I do a little consulting for them and kind of a variety of things. And then also working with designers, which is really my favorite things to do, helping them learn to create accessible patterns.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what does it even mean when we say accessible? If somebody's maybe never really heard about this topic before, what are we even talking about? Who is affected? What kinds of things are problematic, just in a very general sense?
Well, it could be anybody, but for the most, I think what most of us are thinking about for a visual, if you're a pattern designer, it's your pattern, and you want it to be accessible to somebody who has a visual impairment or perhaps ADHD, some sort of neurodivergence, or somebody who cannot perhaps use the keyboard, so they're using an audio, and people who have to use the audio portion of it. So those are the first ones, but really anybody who's got any type of visual impairment or maybe needs a little larger print. What we do find, though, is that accessible patterns, most people who don't think of themselves as needing anything special really like them because they're easy to see, especially if you do an accessible chart. You go from this little tiny chart to this nice big visual chart. So things like that. Oh, color blindness is the other things we work with. So every range of it is we're working with. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay, so you have personal experience related to this, which is kind of why you're so big on it. You want to share a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So I think I grew up into this, which is I was a kid who loved to read, but it hurt. It physically hurt me to read. And I complained, and they took me to the eye doctor, and they gave me exercises, and they basically said, kid, you like to read a lot. And if you read too much, your eyes hurt. And I suppose that's something you'd say in the 1960s. And I believed that. I thought that anybody who read too much had this searing pain in their eyes. And this continued. And when I was, a teenager, my grandma took me to, we went to a movie together and she said, there's a book. And I went to get the book and I went to the library and the librarian says, we don't have it, but there's a large print version. But you can't have the large version because it's for the older people. The large print was new. And I begged and she let me take it home. And all of a sudden I read and it felt good. I could read faster and it didn't hurt. And I was so excited. I went back and every so often they'd sneak me a book. But this idea that, okay, large print for some reason is helping me. And I go off to college and I went to a large university. And after the first quarter, I can just literally remember I am sitting in my last final and my eyes lock. I have double vision. I cannot move my eyes. I barely get through the exam. I go home. They send me to the doctors. They think that there's something, they're saying, oh, you overused your eyes and there's something wrong with your glasses. This goes on for like a year of testing. And finally they say, okay, we're going to send you to this. We've got this neurosurgeon who's doing some research up in the attic of the hospital. This was on the university. And they diagnosed me with this really rare neurological disorder that was actually, my eyes were spasming and locking into place. And secondary to that, they said, oh, no, by the way, you have dyslexia. And so, severe dyslexia. So that was kind of so after that, there's no ADA, there's no anything in place. The only thing that was available was they sent me to the blind students group because I could get readers and I didn't want to take away their readers. But I literally limped through college for 5 years, which at that time was very unusual. And I do get through it with my eyes hurting quite badly. And from there, I actually went on to law school. So 9 years later, I was an attorney. But during that time, I was doing things like I had to figure out how am I going to get through. So I would ask them to Xerox. They just had the first enlarging Xeroxes. Could you make it large print? And they would give me some rest time. I figured out, the eyes with muscle spasm, you rest it. I kind of figured that out. But this is how I go on. And I practiced law for 10 years. And we had our second daughter at that point. And it turned out that she had cerebral palsy and autism and every learning disability known to man. I mean, if you could test for it, she had it. And she had terrible dyslexia. And lo and behold, she had that same rare neurological disorder that I had. Now she's adopted. So this is what's Jessica's laughing because she knows that's like, so I start working with her and taking care of her. And so now we're dealing with both of us and I'm using some of the tools I knew. And of course I'm learning from all the different therapists. And I go back to, I start teaching. Start teaching at her elementary school. I'm teaching English language learners and wrote a curriculum for that. And I taught singing, which I loved. And I thought, oh, I should have done this instead of the law. I was having a great time. And my plan was to credential. She was going to be starting elementary school. I had the temporary credential. And I was going to do the full credential. We go home for the holiday break and I wake up and I'm blind in one eye. And I had been taking a new medication at that time. I had severe early onset rheumatoid arthritis. And, I had young kids, even though I was a little older, I was 47, but this was not. So we tried everything for 5 years. So I tried this medication and it worked great for 6 months until I went blind. I was numb on one side of my body. I was in the hospital for a very long time. I finally get released. I go home. Things are not going well. And a month later, I'm blind in the other eye. So I went through pretty much a sudden blindness. And while I'm in the hospital, I said to my husband, bring me something to do. And a relative had given the kids the looms, the knitting looms, and we were going to make scarves over the holidays. So he brings me the loom and I'm knitting away. And of course, I can't see anything and I can't see a pattern. And so I'm making them up in my head. And I had crocheted as a little girl, and I used to crochet for my dollies. And of course, I couldn't look at patterns, remember everything I had. I would never have been able to. They tried me. I couldn't read a pattern. They tried to learn sewing. I couldn't, anything that involved that, I could never do. I had to make it up in my head. So I was making up patterns in my head, and I entered some contests to win some looms. And then there was a little loom knitting online magazine at the time, and they said, "Would you like to submit some patterns?" So this is how I back into pattern writing. And my patterns are written so I can see them. So they're in this great big font. There's no image, there's maybe a picture because I'm blind. So you can imagine what the take of the pictures look like, or I'm having my 11-year-old take the pictures. You can imagine what these look like. They're not the best. But nobody's complaining is what was interesting. And then I start getting messages from people saying, God, I could never read a pattern, but I can read your pattern. You're the best pattern writer ever. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not the best. I couldn't be the best pattern writer ever. But of course, I realize presentation is making a big difference.
Yeah.
And over the years, no one's ever complained. I don't, sometimes I'll provide, when I do ebooks, I'll provide what I call a paper saver, a small print. But the editing is all for the large print, and no one's ever complained about this very, this accessible format. This is very easy to read format. So
Yes. Yes. And it's our vision affects everything really that we do in the world. It was really I loved one of the from the first issue of In Tandem. It was just the magazine copy, the physical copy, which is not the low vision large print version, but it does have a little bit larger font than a lot of magazines, a lot of
it has a larger font, and it has a little bit what I call a heavier footprint. Maybe bold, you'd almost think of it as bold. So it's immediately easier to see. Absolutely.
Yes, so one person gets it, receives it, and I got the impression that they've purchased, several magazines. Maybe they really like the images and stuff, but they're like, I can actually read it. Like, and it wasn't even, it wasn't the full blown the digital version that also comes with the In Tandem each issue. But it just like the amount of delight that somebody can get in just being able to access something that they haven't been able to previously. And as abled people, as people who don't experience the world from that perspective, we take it so much for granted. And honestly, any of us, you never know what might happen. Like you said, you really did go blind in one eye, like overnight. Like, and
Well, I did. I later on, I was totally blind for 2 years, and then I regained some sight in one eye, which is why I can do the editing and things now. I work with magnification and a lot of special tools. I actually have one that's really cool now. I have a magnifier that the state has loaned to me. They loaned it from a year, and they just gave it to me back again. But it allows me to do all kinds of magnification. But what's really cool about it is I can take a picture of something, like I can take a picture of a credit card or my medical card, and it blow up the number and see it. I mean, these or my prescription bottles, which I have a lot of. The other thing that I've had to deal with over this is I also use a wheelchair, and I've had a lot of neurological damage, the long list of things that have gone on. And unfortunately, the last 2 years, because of that, I can no longer loom knit, which is really sad. So I'm not designing right now. I'm designing my head, but I'm not designing anymore, which I really miss. But I'm doing the editing, which I love, and I've been trying some other crafts. But you just have to plug along.
yeah. And so when we're talking about kind of how this impacts us as digital business owners and people, our customers, if you think about everything that you have to go through online, even just to purchase a pattern. If you're on social media, the alt text and the captions and finding links, and then once you get to the website, actually being able to navigate the website and find the right buttons, and then however it's delivered, if it's delivered via email, or I was just telling Renee before we started recording that I had somebody from a summit just within the last week or two. She had signed up for a freebie that I had offered, and in that email, I had failed to also, a lot of times I'll have the link in a text box, but then I also have the pretty image that has the download button. And I had failed to include the text box link. And I get this message on my website from somebody, and they're like, I really loved what you shared at the summit and was excited to download this thing, but I can't find a link anywhere and I'm blind. And so, my computer can't find the link,
Right.
and
Well,
it's just an image. And so,
yeah, and it's interesting because the other one that comes up a lot is I'll have the designers and they do the accessible patterns, which is wonderful. And then you would go to purchase them and the shop and the checkout is not accessible. And this actually happens a lot in the free shops and things because they're not doing it. I mean, they say something like 80% of the internet is not accessible. So it's really we actually in the Loom Knitters group on Ravelry which is the one I still hang out at. We do have a new blind member, and she's from the EU, and we're having a hard time um, because she doesn't have anybody at all to help her.
Mhm.
And so explaining techniques and finding written explanations that work well for her. It's not that she won't be able to do it because I know I did it, but it's finding those good written, and that's the other thing that happens is you have a link in your pattern to a technique, which is great. But the technique or the link is not accessible. Those kinds of things we run into. In the magazines, we do that a lot. They'll have the QR codes, but we always say QR codes link to information that is not accessible or has not been reviewed for accessibility. So yeah, it's
Yes. So do you have like a few things that you see over and over again when it comes to purchasing from a website, or just like things that are most common for accessibility issues on websites and checkout pages and all of that?
well, yeah, that find sometimes it's just to find the checkout button.
Yeah.
And that it goes to one place and to another and to another. For somebody who's got a visual impairment, or especially if they're blind, they need it to go directly to their cart, and they need to be able to find that cart button easily. God, that is such a, I run into that trouble all the time. I get so frustrated. I know I've put something in the cart and I cannot find the cart button. It's and in images, graphic images for somebody like me is really hard to see. If it would just say in great big black letters, your cart or buy here. Wow, how nice. I know it's not sexy, but you think about it, you want people to be able to easily find things. It came up the other day in Craft Industry Alliance does a monthly group meeting, and the director mentioned that there's a list of 8 things you should do for people, when they go to your website, and that you want them to be able to find in just like 8 seconds. And one of them is those purchase buttons and things like that. I have it right here. It's questions. Your visitors want to see, what are you seeing? Why should they care? What does it cost? And it should be a one click, right? How are you different? Can I navigate with ease? I thought that should have been at the top. To me, that's the big one. And the other thing that really gets me is gray or grayed out text. I see this all the time. It's been very sexy. It's often the default, and
Mhm.
it's incredibly hard to see. You really want, all black text. To me, if everybody just did that right there, we'd have a huge improvement. I
Yeah.
mean, it's pretty. Maybe save that for your logo, but for the information you want people to see, that's important. Make
Yeah.
it easy.
And uh high contrast. So like don't have a dark gray background then with black text on top of it.
If you do black text with white background, that's the best. It's best for most people, and for people who are needing to reverse their backgrounds and things like that. That's one of the things they can do. Usually, that's easy to redo. So if you have the white and the black, then it does it. I'm actually kind of funny. I like I'll show you my keyboard. I like yellow and black. This is an accessible keyboard. You can see how great big everything is, and it's in my colors. And you can't see it. Sometimes it has some Braille on it too, although unfortunately I learned Braille and now I can't feel it. I've lost the
Oh
sensation.
yeah, right.
Yeah, that's been so yeah, so Braille, I've been donating all my Braille books. So,
Yes. And then also I think the talking about contrast highly relates to social media graphics. So whether it's in your stories, whether it's a picture you've created to, announce something, whatever it is, if there's anytime there's text or images on top of a background, that contrast is super important. And there's
well, and I'll tell you where else it's important. So now for people who are hard of hearing, which I am as well, the captions.
yes.
And so you have to think about where the captions, you look at your stories, see where the captions are sitting and make sure there's a dark box for the white captions.
And make sure that so I think we're both thinking Instagram specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like the message bottom, the part at the bottom of the stories, and so if you pull the captions all the way down, you're not gonna be able to see it. There's gonna be text over it and everything. Same with like the videos. If you were to post a reel or a video to your feed, to your grid, if you pull the caption all the way down, it's hidden by the caption that you've put on the thing altogether. Yes, and even as I so often don't have my volume on my phone, and if I'm in public or if I'm just not wanting to bother my partner with
And you're
everything on
using
my
the
phone,
captions.
I
Yeah.
use captions all of the time, and I get so frustrated.
Especially like on TV, they're finding people are just leaving them on and using them. A huge portion of the population are doing that. And I think part of that is because we're not necessarily looking at the TV anymore. So it's just interesting how we're doing it. But the other thing that of course for somebody with a vision impairment is we need to know what's happening. I have somebody I follow that I just love. It's for making the wax seals, which is kind of a new thing. Yeah. For, and she does these great little things, but she never really describes what she's doing. And and so that's a problem. Because if you think about it, if you can't process it or you can't see it or whatever, it's too small. You don't know what's happening. So for all of you who are doing the videos or anything like that, or presenting classes, it's really important to give the information in multiple ways. That's one of the things when I teach that portion of, presentations, you need to give it in written and you need to give it visually and you need to describe it. And your description can be the same as the written, but it's got to be, if you give it those three ways, you're pretty much going to cover everybody's needs, most people's needs. We can't do everybody's, but we try and do most people's.
Yes, and the thing is, we live in such a great time right now where all these tools are so available. Like Instagram, it's so easy just to turn on captions. Sometimes it glitches and it doesn't do it right, but for the most part, it's like
It,
a click of a
it's
button.
not bad. It's
It's not,
not
and
bad.
it gets for me, it gets probably 98% of the words correct.
And Zoom is a lot better too. Zoom used to lag behind. That's the other thing is sometimes it lags behind. So you may want to give watch it and learn where your pauses are. And when we use technical terms, you kind of have to, that's the one where you may have to find, oh, maybe I need to say something a little differently, or you want to offer a written, you want to do a visual and then maybe you want to write up a little detail of what you did and nice black print, big text on white. So it's easy to see.
Yes, yes. And then thinking of another program that I use often for video, I take these larger videos that I have on the podcast, and then use Opus Clip is the program that just automatically cuts it into smaller clips. So then I can use it on Instagram Reels or I could put it onto stories, I could put it onto YouTube Shorts, whatever, but they automatically do the captioning too. So there's so many tools out there. You don't have to just do it on Instagram. There's all these tools that automatically do the captioning, and it's so much faster just to go in and edit something that's wrong. But YouTube automatically does it. You can go in and edit it. You can upload your own that's fit to the whole transcript as well. But
Right. Well,
there's
I was going to say
so
the
much
tree, if
technology.
you can get the recommendation is you do get the AI transcript, and then you go in and correct it and provide it. That's a great way of doing it. People like that. And actually, I say if you're going to be teaching something, if you can even do that ahead of time, it's really nice to provide that for people, because then somebody who's deaf or blind, who's impaired in some way, is going to be able to ask questions and participate a lot more.
Yes, yes. You mentioned Zoom also, and do you have to, does if I'm hosting a Zoom, do I have to do anything special to enable it? I think I have it just clicked on a default setting where it says
I
anybody can.
think it's most people have it default, and it comes up, and then you can just tell Zoom whether you want them to run or not. You can also, for people who are using the captions, you can adjust the size. So Zoom has that option, which is really nice. And so I'm trying, yeah, there it is, show captions. And yeah, and it also there's caption settings allows you to do it. You can also chat can be adjusted too, so you can do all of those kinds of things. So because I can't see, I was teaching my classes and the little chat pops up at the bottom, people, and I'm like, I'd have to look at the beginning. I can't see the chat, you may have to wait. Sometimes I catch it, but otherwise you're going to just have to wait, or I usually try to have somebody with me to say, okay, stop and answer a question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. And then I mentioned my email provider earlier, Flowdesk now. Flowdesk is, meant to be this pretty aesthetic, use all the photos, which, is nice aesthetically. But now they have also finally implemented so you can add alt text to all of the images, to the links, to everything. So definitely check
A
out your
little
email server.
caution though, if the automatic alt text, you have to check it. It is not good.
Yeah, Flowdesk does not do automatic, but Microsoft Word, that's what I use for writing my
Yeah,
pattern. They do the alt text, but definitely edit
yeah,
it.
it's terrible. That has a long way to go. And the other thing is, because we're talking about patterns, patterns are a technical document. And so I talk, when I teach this, I talk about that you have your artistic description and you have your technical description. So, I always show a picture of my daughter wearing a little yellow hat holding our cat. And I say the artistic or the typical description is going to be a picture of a young woman with brown hair holding an orange cat and wearing a yellow hat. And that is it is correct, but it is not telling, if you're going to want to buy this pattern, it tells you nothing,
Yes.
right? Other than that it's a hat. And so what you wanted to say is beanie style, fitted beanie style cap with a ribbed brim. And, you want to go into the detail of what the hat looks like. And if you have multiple pictures, I love that. I know this is what I do for In Tandem and for the others. When you have multiple pictures, you can almost tell a little story about the hat, about the garment, about the item, very technical and detailed. That is going to tell. That is going to tell the person who can't see it. Remember, there's a lot of people who cannot process images. I can see them, but I can't process them well. Once I've seen them and had a good description, maybe, or I've had a good time to look at them. The other thing is, like, for somebody like me, I have to run color filters because of the glare and things. So they hate me at Word. She's always correcting me. I get the colors wrong. I've learned I don't just put color descriptions in my alt text anymore, because I always get them wrong. She says, Renee, that wasn't pink. It's purple. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm kind of not doing that anymore. I try and just say contrast tones, medium, dark, light, things like
Yes.
that.
Yes. So for an alt text description, how long should that be typically for an image?
They're they're typically not too long. There's been a lot of debate about how many words or how many letters. I try and keep it to 3 short sentences, maybe, or one long, one or two long, depending, on how you can do it. So that seems to be working well. But the idea is that it's a shorter, you can, if you're not sure about putting all text in, you can just caption an image, you'd say image or image description or however, and do a caption. And they can be this, you can do both, because there's a lot of people who are not running a screen reader who have trouble seeing the image. Especially ads, by the way. If you have something where you're running an ad, those need to be all that text that is in the ad is often impossible to see. So like when we do the screen reader version for Moorit, we're actually creating accessible versions of the ads.
Yes.
So that's both alt text and captioning.
And I'm sure that's a whole nother topic as well when you talk about websites, having a blog, if the folks who have ads in their blogs, I feel like that's probably a whole thing.
Very difficult. Well, and I'll tell you, the one I run into is because I run magnification. When they're running lots of ads like that, I pretty much cannot use the site. It's a problem, and I just leave, and I'm always disappointed, especially if I went there to shop. But that's a problem. What I was going to, wanted to go back to the newsletters though quickly is that something that's really easy to do is just to have a second version that's just plain text.
Mhm.
At some point you've written that text, and if you just save that and have available a little PDF or, however you want to do it, boy, that would solve the problem. And you
Yes.
could right at the beginning say, plain text version available.
Yes. I
Large
love
print,
that.
large print plain text, version.
Yes, yes. All right, so that I think that segues perfectly into talking a little bit more about actual patterns. What are what are we needing to do? And I think we should also touch on, there's like a low vision discussion.
Yeah.
There's also the screen reader discussion. So let's talk first about low vision.
Okay.
What needs to be considered? And we won't talk about everything because you have a class. We'll talk more about the class that you have
I do.
available.
First of all, I should say, lately we've been calling it easy to read or large print version. Low vision is the term that Ravelry used, and Ravelry was one of the first to do the big indexing. So that's where that came from, but it's kind of a misnomer because there's a lot of people who need this who don't consider themselves low vision. Let's say you have dyslexia or other things. But at any rate, basically what we're looking at is a large print document that it's between 22 and 24 point font. Okay, so that's the standard we've established, which is bigger than what the print publishers use. They used to be 18, but this seems to be a very good size. That 24 point is actually wonderful. It's what's a sans serif font, which means it's smooth. It doesn't have any wings on it. A nice one is Arial or Verdana, if you want to look. Those are the two we use in the magazines. All black, like I said, all black, all black, all black. None of that grayed out stuff. No pretty colors. We're going with all black. And no italics, because italics are very hard for people to read. And then the big one is that all the directions are written out. If there's a chart, you have to be able to make the pattern without using the chart. So those are the basics that we're looking at there. And that's a terrific pattern if you can do any and all of those. The other one that isn't required by Ravelry to make that, and also for the accessible patterns index standard, but is used by pretty much everybody, is left justified. Single column left justified. Very important. Very
Yes.
important.
And what about abbreviations?
So for screen readers, so then we get to the screen reader. For a screen reader is a software that reads aloud the document. And somebody like me we purchase a screen reader software that we run, but you can test it out and get a feeling for what a screen reader is like. If you have any PDF document, it has a read aloud function. And you could try that and see how it does on your patterns. But so once you have the screen reader, the problem is screen reader is going to do something like you're reading a knitting pattern, and it'll see row R1, P2, X5. And it is going to read that as R1, page 2, X5. It's not going to say times 5. So it's not going to, and it's going to probably leave out most of the abbreviations. So the problem is that screen readers have some built-in abbreviations like the P for page 2, and a few others we have to take out. And they also don't recognize a lot of symbols and repeats. So what happens is we make it page 2, and we start removing, like we'd say, 5 times. And instead of repeats with an asterisk or something, we might say begin repeat or start of repeat or second repeat. In other words, we start breaking this down. It makes a much longer pattern. It is a bit of effort to do the screen reader patterns, depending on how complicated your patterns are. But on the other hand, you get a pattern that if somebody cannot follow abbreviations for whatever reason, they can follow this pattern. So I have my quote on these is that I always say is if you give us the patterns, we can make anything.
Yes, yes. Um, so I also wanted to touch on the fact that if if you really want your to have a version of your pattern that has italics and it has pretty fonts or whatever, that's your branding. That's fine and great. We can provide multiple PDFs in our pattern. So you can have, your aesthetic version. You can have a mobile version. You can have the easy to read version. You can have a screen reader version. You don't have to necessarily quote unquote sacrifice your
Oh,
branding.
no, as a matter of fact, most designers do have multiple versions when they do this. Yeah. They'll have the large print version is the most common because it's easiest to do. And that actually that works really great as a mobile version. We find those can they work well on Kindle, and people like them on their tablets and in their programs, their knitting programs. They work very well because they're easier. They don't have all the extra stuff, especially the multiple columns. And think about, you have little boxes and little tips, and all that's gone, so it makes it a little nicer. Also, in the screen reader versions, where you would say you're on page 42 and it says go back to page, row 2 on page whatever page, that's gone. We make these very linear if at all possible. And if there's multiple sizes, we'll tell them they're going to jump from one size, to tell you where to go, so they don't have to listen to 10 sizes on the sweater. So there's lots of things you can do to streamline the process. And we're doing color work patterns in screen reader. Yeah. So
Um, so let's talk also, sorry, I'm jumping all around on you here, but let's talk about charts in the easy to read version. We talked about them being large. What if we do have color work with more than two colors? What kind of colors are actually high contrast?
So, what I usually say is a white background. I have you darken and heavy the line. You can make the lines darker. And often if you're using charting software, there's the ability to do that. Sometimes it's in the print function, and Stitch Fiddle, that's where it is, but you can go right ahead for that high contrast. And then I like magenta. Magenta is very nice, and sort of a bright blue is very nice. You can kind of play around with it. Certain colors are not good, reds and greens. So the problem is that there's about 12 different kinds of color blindness. So this is where ideally you just want the written directions. That's going to be your best. But sometimes it's nice to have, and I actually have used charts. I've done some picture washcloths, and so when I do it, I do some color charts so people can see, can kind of have the idea of the image. It was really interesting. I was doing it as a I did a mystery loom along last summer, and we were giving out, every week was a different pattern. And one of my blind loom knitters, who's so sweet, she's always knitting my pattern. She says, Renee, I've knit it, but I can't tell what it is. She was feeling the bumps, and she was guessing good, but she didn't have it right. And so she thought it was a basket, and I made her a basket. I ended up making one. We added one in. And after that, I made sure to, because we were making it such a surprise, I actually had not put a description in because it's a mystery, right? So after that, I would email her and say, and I wrote, anyone else need the description? Let me know. So things you don't think about, even me, you don't always think about things, but I get really good feedback from that community, which is lovely, and that's been really nice.
Yes, yes. Something I don't think I mentioned earlier, I was going to mention on the high contrast, like for images and social media and things like that. There's some resources online. If you just search accessible high contrast colors, you can take like your colors from your branding, plug them in, and see if they actually show up very well on top of each other and what actual combos are good. are, are easier to see. And you can use that then in your website, maybe even in your logo, choosing which colors you actually put on top of each other. That's so valuable, I think.
Well, and we can play that little game with your background right now because I can see the design
Yes.
circle and I can see those little flowers there, but the rest of it's kind of muddy for me. So
Yes.
if you look at it, I mean, but because it is black, it is still showing up, which is nice, and it's open. But you can just kind of see, you've got all those multiple colors, and you can just kind of see. And if you can imagine, if any of it was in gray, forget it. It's
Yes, yes. And that is, that's definitely, the aesthetic of it is meant to be kind of like a watercolor, like, like blend whatever. But then if it's meant to be that to start with, it's going to be even harder to see for people who have vision impairments.
So if I were doing it, if it was me doing it for my version, I would take pattern design circle. I'd move it to the center on the white. I'd make it a little bigger. I'd give it capital letters because that helps, by the way. Initial capitals is really nice. And take out the italics.
Yes.
And that would be your accessible version. And that would make sure it isn't as sexy, although you can find some cute, you can find some cute logos. But that would be the accessible version for your email, that you're sending out or something like that.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that if anybody watching the video, that's a very, I don't know, easy way to share kind of what we're talking about. Um, so there's a lot to accessibility. I know one thing that we've talked about in other conversations that we've had together is like don't get so overwhelmed feeling like you have to do everything to start with. Um, Changing a few things and moving forward from there is a help in and of itself.
Absolutely. When I teach, I often say, just if you just do one thing, you're going to help a lot of people. And so the last thing I want you to do is to feel overwhelmed. But if you could just do, all black and maybe the sans serif, that right then and there, you will help. And if you could go loud, and I say go big and go bold, but go big and go black. If you could do those two things right there, even if you do more of that, is going to be huge. It's just going to be huge.
Yes, yes, I love that so much. And admittedly, a little bit ashamedly, I've been talking to Renee for a year and a half now, started working on Indianum. I still have not addressed my patterns. That's something I am hoping to do this year. Um,
It's
but
a lot to do. It's a lot to do. I actually have patterns that I need still to go back and do more of, do more screen reader work on, so it's a lot to do. But the reality is if you can even do a couple, one of the things I wish is the big designers would do some, if they have an ebook or something, have some available. It would be so nice. And tell people when you have it. That's the other thing. I was like,
yes.
tell people, let them know it's out there, that you have this and that the charts are big and they can find it. That would all be really lovely.
And you have a resource that also shares
Right.
designers that do have easy to read versions, etc.
Right. A few years back when Ravelry was having some trouble, and I realized at that point they were the only indexed for these patterns, I decided we needed something different. And so that's actually when I started doing these presentations and things and started doing the editing because that allowed me to support this site. So I have an accessible site called the accessiblepatterns.index.com. So it's an accessible platform, which means it's a little more expensive because that's how we do it. You have to pay for that, but it's accessible. And then I've been adding in as fast as I can, which is really slow, unfortunately, but I try and put all the patterns and magazines and other resources in. I've been putting in, there were some Braille things out there. There were some other things out there. So I've been working. And of course, sadly, now we've been around for almost 4 years. And so some things are becoming unavailable recently. There was a Braille and large print company they just stopped providing their knitting patterns and their craft patterns. So that was a loss. And some designers stop doing it. And I hate that. I keep saying, then wouldn't you at least let the accessible patterns stay around? We have
Yes.
stuff to do. But that's there, and it's a nice resource. And and if you have a pattern that I haven't added in, bug me, because something I am behind. I know I am. But it's really nice. And actually recently we had a whole year's worth of fees paid by if you the yarndatabase.com. I want to give them a plug because yeah, Nancy is just the sweetest thing. We started at the same time and she's been a huge supporter. So that's really nice because I try and have enough we could keep going in the future. So all the work that I do on this, that's what it's doing. And I really like that. And it's been a nice resource.
Yes. And you have a class available online to learn more details about all of this. And it's a very affordable price point from my perspective.
It's $20. It goes through the basics of writing an accessible pattern, and it includes a free review. Although I do ask you, don't send me a 150-page pattern. Don't send me your longest pattern. I love to review it. I'll give you tips. And often that's enough for some people to get going, especially if they're just doing the large print versions, or if they write patterns that are relatively similar, and then sometimes people will come to me and say, we've got, a pattern we're just not sure about, and I do a quick review. So I love to do that. Just, not a problem.
Yes, yes. So, purchasing that class, not only do we learn a lot as designers about accessibility, but that also, I think what you were saying earlier is that that funds the accessible pattern index. That helps make it actually stay alive and possible
That's
as
right.
well. So,
Exactly. That's what funds it.
yes. So, I there are very few things that I tell people they need to go purchase. But I would say if you found value in this podcast episode, that I would say is a very worthwhile place to spend $20. We as designers get a lot from it. And I love that it just continues to contribute to
Yeah,
the
and then I can talk to you again, once you have it, let me know and send me a pattern and we'll have fun. We'll go over the pattern and then you'll have one. You'll have started.
yes, yes. And so often, I mean, so many things in life, the hardest part is getting started with the first step. So, yes. Is there anything else, Renee, that you want folks to know about accessibility? Anything that I forgot to ask you? I'll have the links in the description for the accessible pattern index for your class.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead and you can put my email in there too, rvanhoy@hotmail.com.
I'll add that.
You'll probably stick accessibility or something in the line so I I find it in my spam. There's so much to know. I think I'll go back to not being overwhelmed. Don't let it overwhelm you. If you can even do one thing, it's such a help. It's such a great help for anything that you do. I think if you start thinking about your presentations, especially those of you, I think so much of you are doing things online and video and classes. I think that's an area that people would love to know. Let them know I'm going to be more descriptive, or I'm going to provide the written. I have friends who are deaf, and the first thing they ask is, about my classes is, am I going to be able to understand it? And I'm like, yeah, there's a whole written description. I do trainings and presentations if that's, if you're thinking that's something where we did one for in tandem. And so I do things like that. So if you have something like that and you want to do it, you do more in person, we absolutely can. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you were talking before we started recording about how you've done like well, how you shared about how to make presentations accessible.
Yeah.
So you can, reach out to Renee if you want to learn more about making presentations, like anything accessible related. Uh, Obviously, you're a
I'm not a technical person, so I'm not going to help you technically, but I'm a
yes.
usability. I think that's yeah, I had fun. I worked with the last 2 years with H&H Americas, the big convention. Craft Industry Alliance does all their teaching, all their presentations. So I got to work with all their teachers on presentations. And so there we're talking about everything from the physicality of the room, make sure your people in wheelchairs have made it in, make sure people can hear, we talk about how you do these things, and then on the presentations themselves. So that's a kind of it's branched out, but it's certainly gone further. You think about me and starting with those, can you enlarge my test in college to this, it's been an interesting journey.
Yes, yes. Well, this has been so wonderful. I'm so glad that you joined us here on the podcast to share with even more designers. Honestly, the first step is exposure and even understanding what it is and where to begin. So I'm sure this will be a tremendous, tremendous resource. And thank you so much for sharing so generously.
Oh, thank you so much. And I should say, Moorit magazine will be coming out. We'll have the next issue in March. But if that's one where if you ever want to see an example of what this looks like, they do both the screen reader and the large print versions, as well as their digital and print versions. So that's a great way if you really want to see something. It's a crochet magazine, but it'll give you a great example of what we're doing, what it really looks like.
And I mean, people are excited in general that it's a crochet magazine. So
it's a lovely crochet magazine out of Scotland. Every time I get my issue, it's really exciting. And then, of course, In Tandem will be coming out too, and they have the large print version, which is lovely. So we'll have the both coming out in March. March will be a big month.
Yes, yes. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you again.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you found it valuable, please share the podcast with a designer friend. And if you have a minute, leave a review. It's so helpful for me and means the world to me. Chat soon.